The grand chamber of the Terran High Council gleamed under the light of 3 moons, its crystalline walls reflecting the worried faces of Earth's most decorated military leaders. Queen Amara stood before the tactical display, her obsidian crown catching starlight as she studied the holographic map showing the Kraxan Empire's relentless advance across human space. "We've lost contact with the Centauri colonies," General Richards announced, his weathered face tight with concern. "The Kraxan fleet will reach Earth within 2 standard weeks." The room erupted in desperate suggestions from the assembled warriors and strategists, each voice trying to rise above the others. In the back of the chamber, Thomas Reed adjusted an environmental control panel, his movements precise and practiced. At 34, he had spent his life maintaining the systems that kept humanity's last strongholds running. His brown hair was already graying at the temples, his hands calloused from years of delicate work with tools and machinery. Queen Amara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough." The room fell silent. Her green eyes swept across the gathering until they landed on Thomas. "You. The technician. Come forward." Thomas froze, then slowly made his way through the parting crowd. He could feel the confused stares of the generals and admirals as he approached the Queen. His work coveralls seemed suddenly shabby compared to their gleaming uniforms. "Your name?" Amara asked, her voice gentle but commanding. "Thomas Reed, Your Majesty. Senior Systems Technician, Grade 3. Tell me, Thomas Reed, what do you see when you look at this tactical display?" Thomas studied the hologram, his technician's mind automatically analyzing the patterns of ship movements and defense grids. "I see, systems, Your Majesty. Networks. Flow patterns. Like the environmental systems I maintain, but on a larger scale." A smile touched Amara's lips. "Exactly. While others see battles and strategies, you see the underlying structures." She turned to address the room. "We have just received intelligence that the Kraxan flagship carries their entire command and control network. If we can infiltrate it, we can end this war." General Richards stepped forward. "I'll assemble our best Special Forces team immediately." "No," Amara interrupted. "They'll be expecting that. They'll be watching for soldiers, for spies, for warriors." She turned back to Thomas. "But they won't be watching for a technician." The chamber erupted in protests. Thomas felt his heart pounding against his ribs as the implications sank in. "Your Majesty, I'm not a soldier. I just fix things." "Precisely." Amara's eyes held his. "And that is exactly why you're perfect for this mission." The Kraxan pride themselves on their technological superiority. Their ships are marvels of engineering. But every system, no matter how advanced, needs maintenance. Needs technicians. She gestured to the tactical display. "Our spies have confirmed that several of their maintenance crews were lost in recent battles. They're desperately seeking replacements. With the right documentation, the right approach. They'd welcome me aboard," Thomas whispered, understanding dawning. "More than that," Amara continued. "You'd be invisible to them. Just another worker in the machinery of their empire. And that invisibility will let you reach places no warrior could ever access." Captain Celine Voss, the legendary Special Forces operative, stepped forward. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight braid, her dark skin marked with the subtle cybernetic enhancements of her trade. "Your Majesty, this is madness. He'll be killed within hours." "Not with you protecting him, Captain Voss." Amara's words silenced the room. "You'll accompany him, posing as another technician. Your skills will keep him alive long enough to complete the mission." Thomas looked at the tactical display again, his mind already breaking down the problem into its component parts, just as he would with a malfunctioning life support system. The command network, it would need primary and secondary cooling systems, power distribution nodes, data routing junctions. He pointed to several locations on the holographic ship schematic. These would be critical failure points. Amara's smile widened. You see? He already thinks like we need him to think. She placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. I know this isn't what you imagined for your life, Thomas Reed. But right now, your skills, your way of seeing the world, might be the only thing that can save humanity. Thomas thought of his small apartment in the residential sector, of his regular maintenance rounds, of the quiet life he'd built for himself. Then he thought of the colonies going dark one by one, of millions of lives snuffed out by the cracks in advance. He straightened his shoulders and met the Queen's gaze. I'll need my tools, Your Majesty. And access to whatever technical data we have on Kraxan systems. Captain Voss stepped closer, her cybernetic eyes scanning him with professional assessment. We have 2 weeks to turn you from a maintenance technician into an infiltration specialist. Are you ready for what that means? Thomas gripped his tool belt, drawing comfort from the familiar weight. No, he admitted. But I'll learn. Sometimes the most complex problems require the simplest solutions. And sometimes the best way to fix a system. He looked up at the holographic display of the Kraxan flagship. Is from the inside out. Again, Captain Voss commanded, her cybernetic eyes tracking Thomas's every movement as he attempted to bypass the security panel. His hands trembled slightly as he connected the diagnostic tool to the circuit board, searching for the familiar patterns in the alien technology. The training facility deep beneath the palace had become his home over the past week. Its stark walls were lined with salvaged Kraxan technology, each piece a puzzle he needed to master. Sweat trickled down his back as he focused on the delicate connections. Dead again, Voss announced as red lights flashed across the panel. In a real situation, you'd have triggered 3 different alarm systems. The Kraxan would have detected your presence, and we'd both be floating in space right now. Thomas sat back on his heels, frustration evident in his face. The systems are similar to ours, but there's something I'm missing. The power flow isn't behaving the way it should. Voss knelt beside him, her silver braid falling over her shoulder. Stop thinking like a human technician. The Kraxan don't view technology the way we do. To them, it's not just machinery, it's an extension of their consciousness. She placed her hand on the panel, her cybernetic enhancements gleaming. Feel the rhythm of the power fluctuations. They mirror the Kraxan's own neural patterns. Once you understand that, you'll understand how to become invisible to their systems. Thomas closed his eyes, letting his hands rest on the cool metal. He'd always had a knack for feeling the pulse of machinery, the subtle vibrations that told him when something wasn't right. Now he needed to learn a whole new language of mechanical rhythms. Tell me about the Kraxan, he said, opening his eyes to look at Voss. Not their technology, tell me about them. If I'm going to think like them, I need to understand them. A shadow passed over Voss's face. I've fought them for 15 years. Lost more friends than I can count to their expansion. The Kraxan believe they're the next step in evolution, a perfect fusion of biological and technological advancement. They see us as primitive, barely worth noting except as an obstacle to their progress. She stood, pacing the room. But that superiority is their weakness. They can't imagine that a primitive human could understand their systems, let alone manipulate them. That's why this plan might actually work. Their training sessions continued, day and night. Thomas learned to move silently, to blend into shadows, to make himself unremarkable. Voss taught him the basics of self-defense, though she emphasized that if it came to fighting, they'd already failed. At night, alone in his quarters, Thomas studied endless technical readouts of Kraxan systems. He began to see patterns in their technology, a beautiful but alien logic that slowly became familiar. He dreamed in circuits and power flows, his mind adapting to think in new ways. One evening, as they shared a meal after training, Voss asked him a question that had clearly been on her mind. why did you become a technician? Thomas was quiet for a moment, stirring his synthetic protein ration. My father was a deep space miner. He used to say that the difference between life and death out there wasn't the big, dramatic things, it was the small maintenance tasks that everyone took for granted. One faulty seal, one miscalibrated sensor, and people died. He set down his spoon. I wanted to be the person who prevented those deaths. Not through heroics, but through careful, patient work that no one ever noticed. Until now, I guess. Voss studied him with her cybernetic eyes. You're different from what I expected, she admitted. When Queen Amara chose you, I thought she was making a mistake. But now. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert on Voss's comm unit. Her expression turned grim as she read the message. The Kraxen have accelerated their advance. We've lost the outer defense line at Proxima. We don't have 2 weeks anymore, we have 5 days. Thomas felt his heart rate spike, but he forced himself to remain calm. Then we'd better make them count. Show me that security panel again. I think I understand what I was missing before. This time, as he connected to the Kraxen system, he didn't fight against its alien rhythms. Instead, he let himself flow with them, becoming part of their pattern. His fingers moved with new confidence, and for the first time, he felt the technology responding to him as if he belonged. The panel lights turned green. Voss's eyebrows rose slightly, the closest she came to showing surprise. Well done. But that was just the beginning. Tomorrow, we start the hard part. As Thomas lay in his bunk that night, he thought about how much his life had changed in just a few days. He'd gone from being invisible by circumstance to being invisible by choice, turning his unremarkable nature into a weapon. The fate of humanity rested on his ability to remain unnoticed, to blend into the background of the Kraxen's perfect technological world. It was terrifying, but there was also a strange comfort in it. After all, staying invisible, keeping systems running smoothly without drawing attention, that was what he'd been doing his entire life. He just never imagined those skills would make him humanity's last hope. The Kraxen maintenance shuttle shuddered as it approached the massive flagship, its hull gleaming like liquid obsidian against the starfield. Thomas sat in the co-pilot's seat, his borrowed technician's uniform feeling stiff and foreign against his skin. Beside him, Captain Voss expertly guided their approach, her silver hair now dyed black and her cybernetic enhancements carefully disguised. Remember, she murmured, your maintenance specialist Thorin, transferred from the Outer Rim fleet. I'm your assistant, Venna. Keep your responses brief, let me do most of the talking. Thomas nodded, running through his cover story one last time in his head. Their forged credentials had cost the lives of 3 deep cover agents to obtain, and they would only hold up to cursory inspection. Everything depended on their ability to seem unremarkable. The shuttle's comm crackled to life. Maintenance Vessel 247, state your purpose, came the metallic voice of Kraxen Control. Reporting for assigned duty rotation, Voss replied in the clipped tones of a Kraxen worker. Transferring from Sector 9, authorization code Theta 79 Delta. There was a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity. Thomas forced his breathing to remain steady, remembering Voss's training. Fear could be detected in the subtle changes of voice, in microscopic alterations of body language that the Kraxen sensors would instantly recognize. Confirmed. Proceed to Docking Bay 12. The massive ship loomed closer, its surface revealing itself to be a complex pattern of interlocking plates and energy conduits. Thomas's trained eye could see the genius in its design, and the potential weaknesses. Every system, no matter how advanced, needed maintenance. Needed people like him. They docked without incident, the shuttle's airlock connecting with a soft hiss. As they gathered their tools and stepped into the Kraxen ship, Thomas felt a subtle vibration through the deck plates, the heartbeat of the massive vessel's power core. A Kraxen supervisor met them at the airlock. Its humanoid form was enhanced with visible cybernetic improvements, its skin having a metallic sheen that caught the light. You will begin in Section 47 Beta. Environmental systems are showing efficiency decreases of 0.03%. This is unacceptable. Understood, Supervisor, Thomas replied, keeping his eyes appropriately lowered. We'll begin immediately. As they made their way through the ship's corridors, Thomas felt sweat trickling down his spine despite the perfectly regulated temperature. Every crew member they passed could be the one to see through their disguise. Every security scanner could be the one to detect their true identities. But no alarm sounded. No suspicious glances followed them. They were just two more maintenance workers in a ship of thousands, invisible in their mundane purpose. They reached Section 47 Beta, a maze of access tunnels and control junctions that served the ship's life support systems. As soon as they were alone, Voss activated a small device that would mask their conversations from surveillance. "The command center is 3 decks above us," she whispered, consulting the ship schematics on her datapad. "But security there will be impossible to bypass directly. We need to find another way." Thomas was already studying the environmental system's layout, his mind mapping the connections and power flows. "We don't need to go to the command center," he said slowly, an idea forming. "Look at these junction points. The command center systems are all connected to the same primary cooling grid. If we can access the maintenance subsystems here, we can work our way through the ship's infrastructure," Voss finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Using maintenance access ways instead of main corridors." They worked their way deeper into the ship's systems, Thomas actually fixing various minor issues as they went to maintain their cover. Each repair gave him greater insight into how the Kraxan technology functioned, how it thought. Hours passed as they moved carefully through the vessel's arteries, avoiding patrols and security checkpoints. Thomas found himself falling into an almost meditative state, letting his instincts guide him through the labyrinth of machinery. Then they found something unexpected. "These power readings don't make sense," Thomas muttered, studying a junction box. "This section is drawing far more power than environmental systems should need." He traced the power flow through the ship's network, his eyes widening. "There's something hidden here, masked by the environmental system's power signature." Voss checked their position against the ship's schematics. "This area should be empty space according to the plans. A blank spot." They shared a look, both knowing they had to investigate. Following the power signatures, they found a hidden access panel that led to a sealed chamber. Thomas's hands moved almost automatically over the control panel, his recent training combining with years of technical experience as he bypassed the security protocols. The door slid open silently, revealing a sight that made them both freeze. Inside was a vast chamber filled with what looked like stasis pods, each one containing a sleeping form. But these weren't Kraxan, they were human. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all connected to the ship's systems through a web of glowing cables. "Prisoners?" Thomas whispered, but Voss was shaking her head, her cybernetic eyes scanning the pods. "Not prisoners," she said grimly. "Test subjects. Look at these readings, they're experimenting on them, studying how human biology interacts with their technology. They're not just trying to defeat us. They're trying to find a way to assimilate us," Thomas finished, horror dawning as he understood the full scope of the Kraxan's plans. "Turn us into them." Before they could process this discovery, an alarm began to sound, not the blaring alert they'd feared, but a soft, pulsing tone that seemed to resonate through the ship's structure. "What is that?" Thomas asked, his heart racing. Voss's face had gone pale. "A signal I haven't heard in 15 years of fighting them. The Kraxan Emperor is coming aboard." The Emperor's arrival created a ripple of activity throughout the massive flagship. Thomas and Voss pressed themselves into a maintenance alcove as squads of enhanced Kraxan guards marched past, their cybernetic implants gleaming under the ship's cold lights. This changes everything, Voss whispered once they were alone again. The Emperor never leaves their homeworld. Something big is happening. She checked her concealed weapons with practiced efficiency. We need to abort. Get back to the shuttle while we still can. But Thomas wasn't listening. His mind was racing through the ship's systems, seeing patterns and connections in a way he never had before. The Emperor's presence isn't a problem, he said slowly. It's an opportunity. Voss stared at him. Have you lost your mind? Think about it. All these enhanced security protocols, the increased power flow to critical systems, they're not just protecting the Emperor. They're creating blind spots. Thomas gestured to a nearby access panel. They're so focused on guarding against major threats that they're ignoring the small things. The maintenance systems, the background processes. The invisible things, Voss finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. The things you understand better than anyone. Thomas nodded, already pulling tools from his belt. But we have to act fast. I have an idea, but it's either brilliant or suicidal. Those are often the same thing, Voss said with a grim smile. What's the plan? Working quickly, Thomas explained as his hands moved over the access panel. The Kraxen's technological superiority is also their greatest weakness. Everything on this ship is connected, environmental systems, weapons, life support, even their neural interfaces. One system flowing into another, creating a perfect whole. Which means if we can disrupt that flow. Voss began. We can create chaos, Thomas confirmed. But not through brute force. We need to be subtle. Like introducing a slight fever into a body, just enough to make the system question itself. Over the next hour, they moved through the ship's maintenance tunnels, Thomas making minute adjustments to various subsystems. Nothing big enough to trigger alarms, just small discrepancies that would slowly compound. A temperature variance here, a power fluctuation there, tiny imperfections in the ship's perfect harmony. They were nearly discovered twice. Once by a maintenance drone that Voss managed to disable before it could sound an alarm, and once by a pair of Kraxen technicians who fortunately were too absorbed in their own work to notice the supposedly locked access panel sliding shut. As they worked, Thomas found himself thinking of his old life, of all the systems he'd maintained over the years. He'd always taken pride in making things work perfectly, invisibly. Now he was using those same skills in reverse, introducing carefully calculated imperfections that would spread through the ship's systems like a virus. There's something else, he said as they finished their preparations. Those humans in the stasis pods, we can't leave them here. Voss's expression hardened. Our mission is to disable the command center. We can't save everyone, Thomas. Actually, we can. He showed her the calculations on his datapad. The stasis pods are tied into the same systems we're disrupting. When everything goes wrong, there'll be a brief window where we can trigger an emergency evacuation protocol. The pods are designed to eject in case of catastrophic system failure. And you can make the ship think it's experiencing exactly that, Voss said, impressed despite herself. But the timing would have to be perfect. We'd need to be in two places at once. Thomas took a deep breath. That's why we need to split up. Absolutely not, Voss snapped. My job is to protect you. Your job is to ensure the mission succeeds, Thomas countered. I can trigger the pod evacuation from the maintenance hub we found earlier, but someone needs to be in the primary engineering section to initiate the cascade failure. He met her gaze steadily. You're the better fighter. If anything goes wrong in engineering, you'll have a chance to fight your way out. I just need to stay invisible for a few more minutes. Before Voss could argue further, another alarm sounded, different from the one announcing the Emperor's arrival. This one was harsh, urgent. They've discovered one of our modifications, Thomas said, checking his datapad. We're out of time. The cascade is starting on its own. Voss grabbed his arm, her cybernetic eyes intense. "You're not the same man who stepped aboard this ship. You know that, right?" Thomas managed a small smile. "I'm exactly the same man. I'm just not afraid to be seen anymore." He checked the ship schematic one last time. Engineering is 2 sections aft. The maintenance hub is 3 levels down. We have exactly 18 minutes before the systems reach critical instability. "Try not to die," Voss said, then surprised him by pulling him into a quick, fierce hug. Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the ship's labyrinth with predatory grace. Thomas took a moment to center himself, feeling the vibrations of the massive ship through his boots. Then he too slipped away, moving through the chaos of increased security patrols and agitated crew members like a ghost in the machine. As he made his way toward the maintenance hub, he could feel the ship's rhythms changing, the perfect harmony of its systems beginning to fray. Soon, the Kraxan would learn what every technician knew in their bones: sometimes the smallest flaw, left unchecked, could bring down the mightiest machine. The real question was whether he and Voss would survive the fall. The maintenance hub thrummed with power as Thomas worked, his fingers dancing across control panels with practiced precision. Around him, the Kraxan flagship systems were falling into carefully orchestrated chaos. Temperature regulators fluctuated, power grids hiccuped, and communication networks stuttered in their perfect synchronization. Through his neural interface with the ship's maintenance systems, Thomas could feel the growing panic of the Kraxan crew. Their cybernetically enhanced minds were so attuned to the ship's perfect order that even these small disruptions felt like physical pain. "Warning, system irregularities detected in sections 12 through 47, the ship's AI announced in its metallic voice. Initiating diagnostic protocols." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. The diagnostics would only accelerate the cascade of failures he'd set in motion. Each attempt to correct one problem would trigger 2 more, creating a symphonic destruction that no one but a maintenance technician would understand. His communicator vibrated, a single pulse from Voss letting him know she was in position in engineering. Now came the dangerous part. Thomas initiated the evacuation sequence for the stasis pods, his heart pounding as he worked. The pods had to be released at exactly the right moment, too early, and the Kraxan would be able to recover them; too late, and the humans inside might not survive the ship's impending systems failure. Suddenly, the door to the maintenance hub slid open. Thomas froze as a tall figure entered, a Kraxan unlike any he'd seen before. Its cybernetic enhancements were seamlessly integrated into its form, creating a being that was neither fully machine nor fully organic. The neural corona around its head marked it as someone of incredible importance. The Emperor had found him. "Fascinating," the Emperor said, its voice a harmonious blend of organic and synthetic tones. "You're the source of our discord. A simple maintenance worker." The being's enhanced eyes studied Thomas with clinical interest. "Yet you've done what armies could not, made us feel uncertainty." Thomas's hands remained steady on the controls, even as his heart raced. "Sometimes the smallest flaw can bring down the mightiest machine," he said, repeating the old technician's wisdom. "Indeed." The Emperor moved closer, its movements liquidly graceful. "That's why we've sought to perfect ourselves, to eliminate such flaws. Your people resist this gift, cling to their imperfections. But you..." A smile curved its metallic lips. "You understand systems as we do. You could be so much more than what you are." In engineering, Voss would be initiating the final sequence. Thomas just needed to keep the Emperor talking for a few more moments. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "Why now?" "To witness the next step in evolution." The Emperor gestured, and the hub's main screen activated, showing the stasis pods and their human occupants. Each failure in the integration process taught us more. Now, finally, we've perfected the process. Today, we would have begun the mass conversion of humanity into their perfect forms. Thomas felt sick as he understood the full scope of the Kraxen's plans. They never meant to destroy humanity, they meant to save it, to force an evolution that would erase everything that made humans human. Perfection is overrated, Thomas said, his finger hovering over the final command sequence. It's our flaws that make us strong. Our imperfections that make us who we are. The Emperor's expression hardened. A primitive perspective. One that we will help humanity overcome. It raised its hand, cybernetic weapons emerging from its arm. Starting with you. Thomas smiled. Actually, I think your systems need a reboot. He pressed the command key. Throughout the massive ship, every system simultaneously hiccuped. For a fraction of a second, power fluctuated, security protocols wavered, and artificial gravity stuttered. In that moment of constructed chaos, several things happened at once. The stasis pods ejected, launching their precious human cargo into space where rescue ships hidden in the nearby asteroid field waited to recover them. In engineering, Voss initiated a cascading power failure that would cripple the Kraxen flagship's ability to control its fleet. And in the maintenance hub, Thomas executed the final part of his plan, a complete shutdown of all cybernetic interfaces ship's-wide. The Emperor staggered as its connection to the ship's systems was severed. For the first time in perhaps centuries, it was alone in its own mind. Around them, the ship's perfect harmony dissolved into discord. What have you done?" the Emperor gasped, its enhanced voice now raw and organic. "Introduced a little chaos into your perfect system," Thomas said, standing tall despite his fear. "Sometimes things need to break before they can be fixed properly." The ship shuddered as secondary explosions began to ripple through its structure. Emergency containment fields snapped into place, separating sections of the vessel. Through it all, Thomas could feel the rhythm of the dying systems, a song of entropy he had conducted like a symphony. His communicator pulsed twice, Voss signaling that her part was done and she was heading for their escape route. He needed to move, but the Emperor stood between him and the door. The cybernetically enhanced being raised its weapons again, but its movements were jerky, uncoordinated without the ship's systems to guide them. "You've doomed your people," it snarled. "Without our guidance, humanity will remain trapped in its flawed state." "Our flaws are what make us human," Thomas replied. "And humanity doesn't need your kind of perfection." He reached out to the nearest console and executed one final command, a complete shutdown of the maintenance hub's artificial gravity. As the Emperor's perfect balance failed, Thomas pushed off from the console, using his years of experience working in zero-G environments to maneuver past the floating sovereign. The last thing he saw as he sealed the hub's doors was the Emperor's face, twisted in an all-too-human expression of rage and disbelief. Thomas flew through the ship's corridors, using maintenance shafts and service tubes to avoid the chaos of panicking crew members. He found Voss waiting at their predetermined rendezvous point, her cybernetic eyes glowing with fierce triumph. "The fleet's command and control is completely shattered," she reported as they raced toward their escape shuttle. "Without the flagship's coordination, they're just individual ships. Powerful, but no longer an unstoppable force." They reached the shuttle bay just as another series of explosions rocked the massive vessel. As they strapped in and initiated launch sequences, Thomas felt a moment of sadness for the beautiful system he had helped destroy. "Having second thoughts?" Voss asked as she piloted them away from the dying flagship. Thomas watched through the viewport as escape pods launched in all directions, carrying both human prisoners and Kraxen crew members. "No," he said finally. "Sometimes being a good technician means knowing when a system is too broken to fix, when you need to shut it down and start over." As their shuttle raced toward the waiting human fleet, Thomas thought about everything that had changed. He was no longer invisible, no longer just a faceless maintenance worker. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he had used his skills, his way of seeing the world, to make a difference. He had reminded both humanity and the Kraxen of an essential truth: perfection isn't found in flawless systems or enhanced bodies, but in the beautiful imperfection of being human. The revolution he had started wasn't one of weapons or warriors, but of small things, of tiny flaws and humble workers and the courage to remain true to oneself. And sometimes, those were the revolutions that changed everything.